This is the next presentation. Because Ishin talked about inspections a little bit as part of an audit. So, and this presentation is geared toward municipalities and helping them understand what they have to do. So we'll skip over some of the components that are relative to what the PFW has to do. If you have questions, again, feel free to speak out. And then just some of the components that we're going to talk about as we go through this process and focus a lot of the time on on-site activities. But the reality is there is some prep work that goes into preparing for inspections at the various industries. And there's a couple of different types of inspections and why you do inspections. And for one thing, from an approved procurement program standpoint, PFWs have to do these inspections a minimum of once a year. But frequency can also be determined based on risk that an industry has. And I mentioned just the high flow discharges that they have. Obviously, you want to have a greater presence there, and that's going to in turn sort of ensure or at least steer the industry toward a greater compliance. And then if they have a repetitive history of violating, then you want to have a greater presence out there, so you're going to do inspections at a higher frequency. And with respect to the types of inspections, whether you do them scheduled or unscheduled, and what we see a lot of times is PFWs, they'll pretty much go to the same inspection, the same industry, the same month every year, so the industry pretty much knows when they're coming. And I say that, and it's a bad thing, but if you look back at our audit track record, CSD almost knows where I'm coming in April almost every year. So I'm trying to change that. But sometimes we announce ourselves going into inspections. We call them ahead of time, let them know we're coming, primarily because we want to make sure that there's somebody there that can answer our questions and walk us through the facility. And that's why we tell cities that they should have industry mandated at least 3 people, a minimum of 2, prefer 3 different points of contact, because people are sick, or people go on vacation, and you don't want to not be able to do an inspection because the only person that knows anything about the plan is not there. So we want they need to mandate multiple points of contact. So that's the problem with doing it unannounced. But if you do it announced, if you get let them know ahead of time, they can stop doing things that they were doing. And we've even gone into places before, even and they'll hold you up getting in, and you can hear all the shuffling in the back, and then some guy gives kind of a nod from the back of the facility that it's okay to come back there. So very suspicious. And then occasionally we'll get disgruntled employees who no longer work there, and then all of a sudden they're eager to tell everybody about what goes on behind the doors there. And so we'll have to go out and do inspections and verify some of the reports that we have. And in emergency situations where you're having toxic fumes, or if you've got collection system crews that are complaining about odors in the sewer, or seeing odd colors in the sewer, then you want to go back and do an investigation and track your way back to industries and maybe do an inspection as a result of that. Certain industries claim confidential information on some of their processes. They've got patented processes. They certainly have the right to do that. They can request that you treat their information as confidential. And they'll have you sign a confidentiality waiver. And in fact, I just signed one at the facility yesterday, but I read it it was a very simple 3-page sentence that just said, we're going to tell you what our patented confidential information is, and just ask that you not take pictures of that, and that you don't document, like model numbers and that sort of thing. And that's different from going into an industry that wants you to sign in before you go. And a lot of times you'll see these 3-ring binders of signings and pages, and there'll be somewhere, not on every page, but somewhere in that binder, will be a paragraph that says that by signing this, you agree not to report on, document, or share any information that you see back here, which means you couldn't write up the inspection report. And we refuse to sign those. I'll let them make a copy of my badge, I'll let them make a copy of my business card, but we don't sign them. Because we have to write a report to document, and so the cities, and we tell them not to sign those. But primarily those signing pages are for safety reasons, so that in the event of a catastrophic event, they can make sure everybody in the building gets out. So they're usually okay with it. Occasionally, if they're a corporately owned facility, they get nervous anytime somebody with a badge walks in. And so, but if you educate them on why you're there and what you're looking for, most of the time you can get in. But you do need your badge. We actually have a Region 9 person that was denied access to an industry with me because she didn't have her badge years ago. Forgot her badge, and so they wouldn't let her in. on the same note, I was denied access into a facility because they claimed that, Homeland Security, because their product, I refused to sign the paper, but they claimed Homeland Security issues keeping me out because the product they made, which is a sun-dried tomato product, was served at the White House of George Bush. So they didn't want me in there because of that. So you just document that you were denied entry and follow up. If I thought there was something back there that I needed to be worried about, we'd go get the local sheriff's office and we'd go in. But he let the city in. But the primary objective is to make sure that every industry is complying with their permit.
Isn't there really, wouldn't that be a requirement of their ordinance that they have to grant you access?
They have to grant, they can't really deny us access if we're their own president, but it was an industry that I wasn't concerned about.
Right.
And their treatment system was on the outside. I went and inspected their treatment system.
Okay.
If it was something I was really concerned about, I would have pushed it. I picked my battles.
Right.
And again, cities have to make sure that they have the appropriate legal authority to be able to get in and do inspection. We try to educate them on that, and also when we go out and do oversight inspections on behalf of state or EPA, we have to make sure that we follow their safety procedures. And Isheen mentioned some of that earlier, that we always have ear and eye protection and steel-toed shoes. And if they have additional requirements that they put on you, that they have for their employees, then we expect that we will adhere to those as well. We were up in an aluminum forming process. They were doing a rolling of aluminum billets, probably the size of this room. They'd go through 3 or 4 rollers and go to the next set of rollers, and they went through about 4 passes in each set. By the time it left there, it was only about 4 inches thick, and it started out about 4 feet thick. And so it's pretty impressive to see them manipulate that metal in that way. But to get around the facility, you had to walk over a catwalk of just 3 steps up and over 3 steps down. And we were being led through there by the plant manager, myself, and one of my coworkers. And as we're heading out the door, we go down the last catwalk of 3 steps, and as we're going out the door, an employee comes off the line and grabs me by the shoulder and points out to me that my coworker did not use the handrail going down the steps. And it's only 3 steps, but it's one of their safety rules that they must use handrails. And she was pointing out to me because they had an incentive program at this industry. If they identified safety violations, then they would get some sort of reward from the industry for that. So I pointed out to the manager that she had caught it, brought it to my attention, and she got some kind of award. So we use handrails. But I thought that was a good thing. Again, we take photographs whenever we can. There are some industries, because of the confidentiality issues, that they don't like you to take photographs. For the most part, if you show them what you want to take a picture of, they'll agree to it. Or you can give them the camera and say, I'd like to get a picture of that. There are some industries that, because of the processes that they do, you can't have electronics on the floor, so we have to give up our phones before we go in. But when we can, we take photographs and always document. I mentioned earlier that from our perspective, if a city's not documenting the inspections, then the inspections didn't occur. So that's important. And I'll skip through these quickly. It's here for information for you. This is basically what we're telling the field today is some of the things that they need to be familiar with before they go on site. And they should have a schematic of each facility so they know where sampling points are, they know where all the process lines are, where possible access to illegal discharges might be. Understanding what the typical production levels are, and we're not going to get into the permitting aspect of it today, but we recommend that cities develop fact sheets for all the permits, and the fact sheets are good tools for inspectors to take with them. And if they have fact sheets in their file, we'll take those with us when we go out to do inspections and just sort of verify that the processes they've documented are actually what's occurring. And when they update that during inspections, that helps them become permit renewal time to make sure that the permits are reflective of what's actually going on at a facility. Pay attention to water use data, because if water use is increased over time, then that could be an indication that either added processes or they've added employees. So then certainly they notify you of these changes.
Possible dilution also.
It could be possible dilution. And we've seen inadvertent and advertent dilution at industries before. And if they're on a compliance schedule, pay attention to that. You can ask them when you're on site how they may be on a compliance schedule to install additional treatment until they've had violations in the past. So follow up with them on how that's going, make sure, I think questions every time you have a presence there helps promote their moving forward again and meeting those compliance days. And again, here's just an example of a schematic of a facility that shows the sewer lines. Knowing what before you go in, having an idea what their wastewater treatment system is supposed to be, and if it's operational. When you go in, you can see if they've got anybody operating it that's specifically assigned to it. We had an industry in Middle Tennessee that they were constantly violating the metals, and the city was not. They wanted their limits raised. The city wouldn't give them to them. Well, I have to know the owner of the industry. His son was my college roommate, so he's calling me as a state employee, wanting me to come out and help them with their problem. And I go in, they've got this elaborate treatment system, but they don't have anybody operating on a regular basis, and they run it about once a week at best. And I sort of explained to him free consulting, but here's what you need to do to operate this, and you can get your metals to fall out and so forth. But he didn't want to do that, and so he just refused to do it because he wanted the city to basically cater to him, and the city wouldn't budge either. And as a result, he had an elaborate system that could clean his ways, and he ended up losing his job. He's been there 20 years because he refused to work with the regulated authority. But having the system in place is one thing, operating is another. We've had industry that we've told that they need to they need to install a pH meter, or they mount it on a post, but they don't connect it to anything, and they say, well, you told us to install one, we did it. We do what you say. The worst case I ever had was a industrial laundry in a very small town. They were the only jobs in the county, so the city was reluctant to take action against them, but they were constantly hammering the wastewater plant with high DOD, and they were a denim washer, bleacher, stone washer, and one of our inspectors had told us they need to put in an oxidation dish, which typically we don't tell people what type of wastewater to put in it. But we go back a year later to do an inspection, and he says, hey, we put that ditch in that you told us about. Why don't you come back here and look at it? And we go back there, and they had dug a ditch in the property behind the building, and there were purple worms coming up out of the ground everywhere. So the state took enforcement action. The industry ended up going out of business. All the jobs in the county were lost, and we were the bad guys. But,
It wasn't California.
no, it wasn't California.
Sorry.
Here's the Middle Tennessee, and you have to be careful where you go there because you might run on moonshiners who might shoot you if you're in a car with a state seal on it. So you have to be careful where you go. This is industrial laundry actually in Arizona, and this is a typical shaker tumbler operation that quit and removed some of the lint, which they were having problems in the past, and they put that in just before we got there, and they also added some pH controls, and then they have another final pH meter at the outfall in the front of the building. I just put this picture here because this is my favorite movie is The Rock, and in that is there's a line in there where he says the only thing harder than breaking out of Alcatraz is breaking into it, and that's what it's like trying to get into industry sometimes. You get the stall packet, and they get to take pictures, sign away your first form.
Give blood.
Yeah, give blood. Typically, we say arrive during normal business hours. What are normal business hours? And this is one of the things I really like about some of these larger programs that have the manpower to do some of these things. LACSD actually has a third shift sampling and inspection crew that goes out because they have, so many industries operate 24/7, and typically that's when the majority of their wash water goes down. They're washing down the floor, even if they're not processing. They wash down, that's the majority of the flow hits during that time. So they have a dedicated crew to go out and do inspections and collect samples during that time. And one year when we did an audit there, I assigned one of our inspectors to go with them. Not me.
Not me.
Low man on the totem pole. But I think that's a good idea. And if cities have the capability to do that, I recommend they do. Always present your credentials. Like I said, if you're denied access, we try to explain to them. Usually education will work, but if it doesn't, we just note it, and then based on whether or not we think there's an urgency there, if there's something that's illegal, then we might go out and collect a sample in the manhole downstream and see if something's there. And it's sort of a judgment call as to how far we're going to push that issue. You know, obviously, if you can see drums from a neighboring property, then that gives you, then you're gonna wanna push the issue and get in there and see what's going on. If you think there's potential hazardous waste that's not being disposed of properly or could be resulting in leaks, and somebody may be at risk, then you would do that. And you certainly don't need consent if you can make an observation from an adjacent property where the general public can be. If you see something that has caused you concern, you don't need consent to go in, but you need to use good judgment so that, you know, your boss is not getting a phone call about why you went in there without consent. Typically, we do perimeter inspections around the facility to see if we notice that there's stains on the parking lot or dead vegetation around the building where there might be an illegal discharge. And we've seen that before where they've had pipes that just been ready to go along. And it's just jumping outside the building and draining to a creek. You know, and so it's just sort of a common sense, be aware of your surroundings. If you see something that causes concern, then you follow up on that. When we go out, when we walk through the facility, when we go to the treatment area, we want to look for sampling point. And they're telling us the pipes are going from A to B to C, and then here you go to the manhole, and there's 4 different pipes going in that manhole. That's an issue for us. We've had that happen, and, you know, we'll immediately collect samples that come back high on metals, whatever, and we make them do some sort of trace to figure out what the source of that water is. This is an industry in Memphis, actually. This is a twofold event. This is a biodiesel manufacturer. They bring in used oil, and they're supposed to be contained in these roll-offs, and then they move them to the facility. But if you look, the entire parking lot's covered with this oil. This is the second time this happened in about a 4-month time frame. It first happened in April of 2012, and they ended up killing a bunch of vegetation behind the facility. So it was more of a stormwater issue initially. Is what happened in the local stormwater agency, county stormwater agency came in, and it just they killed all this vegetation. And this is the property lines right here where you saw that drum earlier, and then there's a creek about right over here. So it's killing all this vegetation down through there. So it's a stormwater issue. They basically excavated all of that dirt, piled it up on another part of their property, put a tarp over it like it was going to magically disappear over time. It's been sitting there. So then that was in, I'll say that was in April or May of that year, and then I was out there in August doing site visits at industries, and one of the city inspectors called me wanting to come back over there, and this is the second time that it happened. And what we found is, in addition to the stormwater discharge, we found a V-notch storm drain coming out with a V-notch weir in behind the property that actually was filled with oils of various kinds that had to have been dumped down that manhole. So it was an illegal discharge from the city. And what ended up happening is there was collection systems monitoring that showed crews at this facility. When the city would get onto them about it, they would clean up that discharge, and then they would have these stormwater discharges. And when they would get called on the carpet for that, then we could go back and collect samples, and the collection system would have high levels. So they were just going back and forth with how they were disposing of it. And so they've been under substantial enforcement since then. I mentioned earlier that battery manufacturers, the showers are actually considered process waste. Keep in mind all the different places that were sources of water from industries that you might get. You know, cafeterias could be an issue. Like I said, equipment washdown typically happens third shift. What are they doing with their off-spec stuff? You know, the paint I told you about, where they dump that. Make sure that they have some adequate control over that stuff, and that it's just not constantly or haphazardly being dumped down the sewer. And you ask those questions, and Isheen was talking about playing her dumb blonde role. The other thing we do, we go as a
I
team.
didn't say blonde. I just said
I'm giving you the benefit of that. We go as teams, and they'll typically have 1 or 2 people that want to escort us through the facility. So we'll split up. I may ask the first guy the questions, and then we'll split up. And we ask them the same questions multiple times and see if we get the same answers. And we don't let them escort us through the facility either. We have to adhere to their safety rules. We're not going to walk in the areas where we're not supposed to be. But if we see an open drum or if we see a floor drain, we're going to walk over there. We're going to ask them. We say we want to walk over here and get this. There's lots of times when we've been out with city inspectors who go in and go, "You don't discharge anything, do you?" "No." "Okay, thank you." And that's it. That's basically their inspection. It's like, well, we're not done. Let's walk through the process. If time allows, we go from the time raw materials come in until product goes out. We will see anywhere where water is generated. We went to a foundry, and we're asking him, we don't want to see anywhere where water is generated, and we can go to the bathroom door. You know, he didn't want to be in there, didn't have time for it. And, you know, he kind of sarcastically, here's where we generate wastewater. I was like, so you don't generate wastewater anywhere else? No, he goes and kicks over in the women's bathroom. I thought, well, so, do you quench these parts after they go through this process? Yes. You never dispose of this quench water? Yes, but we don't put it down the sewer, we dump it out the back door. So, okay, you know, the groundwater people will be here tomorrow. Collect samples. This is another biodiesel facility. You know, it's definitely a housekeeping issue when you see stuff like this, which again sets off red lights. There's bound to be other issues at a facility that doesn't take any more care for their housekeeping issues. So, you know, this is their monitoring point. And so you're standing here, and about 4 minutes later, you get this. A surge comes through the facility and overflows. So clearly, they're under design, and they have very little control over the process. So, you know, if you go back again, you see things like this, and there's a bucket of undefined waste there, and it doesn't have a label on it of any kind. Those are the kind of things that we look for and address during site visits. And the other thing is, prior to their discharge point, what sort of controls they have over what's going into that discharge point. And as you can see, the difference in color here, I don't know how well you can see it, but this is untreated waste and this is treated waste. There's a difference in those two colors. So they've got some untreated wastewater that's getting into their discharge at this point. So again, resulted in some enforcement action on their part. This is that weir behind the first biodiesel place I was showing you. It has all this scum on top of it. We collected samples that day while I was out there, and you know, the management people, again, it's the second time they've dealt with this. They promised us that nobody would dump anything. Back in May, when this first happened, they did learn after the fact that they had an employee who was dumping some of this waste. He was connecting, had these big giant, 2,000-gallon silos, and he was connecting a flexible hose to a valve at the bottom and then running it into the storm drain. Well, and my picture doesn't show this, I wish it did, but the storm drain actually has two 4-inch holes in it, like it's designed for them to put that flexible hose in. And the pipes were still in there when we went up there this day. That's just us collecting. And there's where they were connecting it to. And again, he assured us that back in May this happened, they put a coupling on that couldn't be removed, and it was just a little spring one of my 8-year-old niece could take off of there. And they would just connect this flexible hose to it, and my photography is very poor, but they could connect it here to this pipe, and these two pipes come in, and they're sort of rotated 90 degrees down on the ground. I'll see if I can show you. So we had them. I said, well, if you're not discharging, why are they still in the manhole? He's like, well, here, I'll raise them up and show you there's nothing on it. But when you raise it up, there's stuff running out of the end of it down here. But this is, I don't know if I can see it. Yeah, you can see stuff running out of the end of it right there. And again, he was saying that hadn't happened since May. Well, it's almost a safety hazard walking over those pipes, but yet they hadn't moved them, which made me confident that they were still using it on a regular basis. And the minute they stopped, we go and collect samples out in the sewer system downstream of them, and this is what we got. So, when the day before it was clear as found. So, and so we continued to take samples over about a 5-day period. And we do typically sit down with them in the conference room and explain to them what we're doing, and we'll ask some of the questions there, and as we go through the facility, we'll ask them again to see if we get the same answer again.
What do you typically do about floor drains? And the floor drain goes to the water separator?
Well, if they do, and we're not having compliance issues, I'm okay with that. But the bigger issue is, A, are they aware that there's floor drains in there? B, what all is going in there? Because they may have berms around the process area that separate that waste in the region to get into the floor drains.
Right.
And there are instances where we've had problems with floor drains, and we've insisted that they plug them. And so when we go back and do an inspection a year later, if I know that a city has mandated that industry plug those drains, I go back and I can see the floor drain and there's actually water standing on it, so it's showing that it's actually going through. I'll take a picture of that and document it too. But primarily we want to know that they are aware they're there, and what our concern is. And so immediately when we see the floor drain, we're looking around for chemical storage. Do they have any barrels that are sitting around on secondary containment? What's going to keep them from getting down that floor drain? If they have floor drains, depending on the type of industry, they typically all, are they all draining into one big holding tank? That's when they go to treatment. We look for that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of follow-up. This is a coil coater. This is the first stage in can making. This is, they're not called Pepsi, this facility, but they're making cans for Pepsi. But these are 16,000 pound rolls of aluminum that come in, and they run them through a cup maker. And you know, so what are we concerned about here? They're wiping down the oils off those coatings. That could be a potential waste source. The oils and lubricants they use in the cup making is also a potential waste source. So we want to make sure that they're controlling those things properly. So basically here they're creating a cup that's about 2 inches high in this cup making thing, and then they'll move it into an extrusion process and draw that, or in a drawing process, and draw that can out to the size. This is a two-piece can making facility. All can makers are either 2-piece or 3-piece. But then this is their process line painting. They have a painting and washing line in here, and you'll get rinse waters from this that are going to go into part of the discharge. And so we just make sure that they've got adequate containment around the process area and verify what detergents they're using, what chemicals there might be in that area. And then we also look at treatment systems. This is a clarifier at that same facility. And their discharge, this is their sampling point. They've got flow measurement here, and then they collect the final sample in this, down here. The city sets up a sample there as well. By the way, they make 28 million cans a year in that one facility. No, that's in Arizona. They have the same company has one in Los Angeles too. But that's just one plant. So you think about how many cans of Coke we drink in a year. It's just one plant or one brand. And industries will oftentimes also have flow measurement, not necessarily the outfall internally within the system. That's just a typical flow measurement that they would use internally. I took a picture of this at the college, and they might think it's petty, but they've got drums of chemicals on pallet and then on secondary containment, but I don't know how you can see this, but that one drum is sticking off about 6 inches off the pallet, so it doesn't do any good for that secondary containment underneath it if it's not completely on there. We always give the industry an opportunity to ask those questions too, if they have concerns about what we've commented on. We tell cities, and we try to do this, or be careful not to include editorials in your write-up about how, if you don't think the IU inspector, the IU representative was very knowledgeable, you want to be professional, and you want the information that you have, the comments that you make to be relevant to what you saw, and keep in mind that these, obviously this is going to be a good tool for enforcement if necessary. This is an abridged version. I took all pictures of that.
Yeah, the before and after inspection.
Yeah. Any questions about inspection? Yes.
This may be a bit generic of a question, but were there any particular industries that you found you needed additional prep time or background info to inspect effectively? I'm sure the answer is kind of yes for all of them, but
Well,
standouts?
Yeah, well, you mean as far as the categories?
Categories or
Yeah,
things like that. I mean, it's going to vary by what.
Not anymore because I've been doing it 25 years, but for categories, but organic chemicals, ones you don't see very often. I try to prep more for those. Just from a general standpoint, we spend more time on those that we know are under enforcement action or have had violations in the past, and we want to make sure we understand what they're doing so that when we go on site, we know specifically what we're going to look for and what questions we want to ask, if they're on compliance schedules or that sort of thing.
Well, I spend more time reviewing the files of 413 facilities, which are electroplaters, and there are some that believe that there are no more electroplaters. They should all have been, what do you call it, like reclassified as 433, because ultimately there's been some changes, right? So I'll go there, I'll take extra time in reviewing schematics from their initial BMR, copy the schematics, review the schematics. That way I can see there's new processes added between, from 1970 to today. So I would do a little bit more, paperwork ahead of time before going to that facility, looking at schematics. And then I'd probably even take it and say, oh, this tank is still here, this tank is still here, like check it off. And stuff like that. And just review, like weird ones, like OCPSF, we don't see very often. I would review centralized waste treaters, my favorite.
we used to spend a lot of time on the centralized waste treaters because it was new, and the transportation equipment cleaning facilities as well. We focus on those, primarily because the cities don't know much about it. And it's an education process. We spend a lot of our time doing technical assistance as part of the audit. We want the cities to become as knowledgeable as they can. They were just here. Ishii wanted me to show these pictures, and this is not the exact ones, but this is actually an industry about 7 miles from my house, and they have historically created their ham processor. They have historically created problems for this small town, and politically they've never really taken enforcement action. They don't give the pre-treatment person the support that he needs, and the state have actually stepped in a couple of different times. And they've gone through multiple pre-treatment coordinators because the guys get tired of trying to take enforcement action and bring this guy into place. And the city council always backs off whenever he cries about having to spend money. They'll issue penalties for $10,000, and then he'll say, I can't afford that, so they'll say, okay, you don't have to pay. There's a new sheriff in town, and they're righting the wrongs of 20 years. But the pre-treatment coordinator just recently went there. The facility is the last industry before you hit the sewer system. So they pretty much, he knows what's going on over there, and he knew that there was something based on what's coming into the plant. So he knows to go to this ham processor, and he walks in. The first thing he walks into is their treatment area, and there's a couple of employees standing there beside the treatment system, looking at this wastewater, and don't seem to be alarmed at all by what it looks like on this day, when this is what it looks like on a normal day. And they're not doing anything to address the fact that they have some serious issues here. And that was more alarming to them than anything, that they're clearly aware of it. And then this is their final outfall. It goes into this barrel and then into their outfall. And that's what it looked like on that day. This is what it looks like when they're operating properly. And they're so cavalier about it that that's what has driven these people nuts for years. And finally, they got a whole new city council who doesn't know this guy from Adam, and they really have no sympathy for him. So he's cleaning up his act, whether he wants to or not. He actually called because he realized the writing's on the wall, and he's going to have to change. He called the Tennessee, the Business Development Bureau, and wanted them to find him another city that he could relocate because this city was being unbearable to him. And when the economic community development, that's what it was. They actually called me because I worked for the state for years, and they knew me, and they knew I lived up there. And when I explained to them what the situation was, they called me back and said, we can't help you. But he's like, I'll just move to another place in Tennessee. But they don't want him moving to another place and doing what he's been doing. So, okay.
So if the cities aren't taking enforcement, do you take
Yes.
enforcement against the city?
I actually went to high school in this town, and my first year as a state employee,
Mhm.
I fined that city $20,000.
Right, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. I'm not going to run for mayor anytime soon.
Well, see, here, it's a funny, Chuck and I have known each other longer than we worked at Tetra Tech. I actually was a procurement coordinator for a small town in Tennessee, and so he was my approval authority. Woo! With my eyes. But, I had a very open communication channel with Chuck, because thanks to my old boss, my first boss would tell Chuck, oh, she told you everything wrong about me.
He told me that you were born and raised in Tennessee,
Not.
you were born in Taiwan.
Not, yeah. And so, it was fun. And I took Chuck to his first ever Chinese restaurant, ever. And he asked if they served dog. And it was my parents' restaurant. But because I had a really great working relationship with my approval authority, I had no problems calling him when I had questions. And so I was in a meeting with a categorical industrial user that was really unhappy with their permit limits. They're categorical, they are production-based, their limits are what it is.
Yeah.
It is what it is. There's no way I can go about it.
No place.
And so the consultant for the industry used to work for the state and with Chuck. And he says, I bet I can call Chuck and he will tell you to revise that permit. And I pulled out my phone, he's on speed dial #1, give him a call. And he's like, whoops. And then the consultant went and talked with other POTWs, and he said that that's what he did. And my other POTW friends were like, oh, you messed with her wrong. Not be messing with her, They're really close. So it's good to have a good rapport with your POTWs. You're there to help them out.
And while you're getting up here and getting ready.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, getting ready.
one of the things that I dealt with her city long before she started working there. She was still in college when I was having to go up there, and work with them on their ordinance, because this is again an industry that was not taking, a city that was not taking appropriate enforcement action against their industries, and we were constantly hitting them with fines. So they had to revise their ordinance and develop an ERP, and they were inviting me up there to sit down with their attorneys and the procurement coordinators and walk through the process, because they want to make sure they did it right. And this is one of the things that I try to educate cities on now. When they finally got the ordinance in an approval state, they went before the city council for the final meeting, they asked me to come up there for it. I didn't realize it was being filmed at the time, and the mayor went through this long speech about how we spent 2 years going through this process to get an ordinance, and I'm glad we're done with it. And I jumped up and said, you're not done with it, you're just now starting, because now you've got to implement it. And that's when I realized the cameras were on. I'll sit down. But, making sure that, so we tell cities, don't adopt something that you don't plan on enforcing. And one of the processes that they went through, is they wanted to use a point system to figure out how they were going to take enforcement action against industries, which is not a bad concept. If a violation that doesn't cause harm is 5 points, a violation that does cause harm is 20 points, whatever you set that up. But they went through there and set up this elaborate point system, and then when they went back and looked at a year's worth of data from industry to see how many would be in violation, they were all in significant non-compliance. So they had to go back and reevaluate the point system. But just make sure that your cities don't adopt something that they're not going to enforce.